The morning sun cast long shadows across Kandahar airfield as Captain Raven Nighthawk Delacroix ran her gloved fingers along the M230 chain gun's barrel. The metal was still warm from yesterday's mission, and she could feel every scratch, every dent that told stories of survival. What she didn't expect was the strange etching near the firing mechanism, a series of numbers and letters that hadn't been there the day before. Blackbird 7749 Echo. Commander Jackson Hartwell approached with his usual heavy footsteps, combat boots grinding against the concrete. He'd been watching her for weeks now, this female pilot who flew like she was born in the cockpit but kept to herself like she was guarding state secrets. The other pilots called her the cleaner behind her back, not because she was obsessive about maintenance, but because every mission she touched came back spotless. No casualties, no complications, just results. Delacroix, his voice cut through the desert morning. "What's that you're looking at?" She straightened, her hand instinctively moving away from the etching. "Just routine maintenance, sir, checking for stress fractures." But Hartwell had already seen it. His eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, and when he read those numbers, his face went pale. 27 years in the Army, and he'd only seen that code once before, in a classified briefing that technically never happened, involving an operation that officially never existed. "Where did you serve before this deployment?" His question came out sharper than intended. Raven's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Standard rotation, sir. Training at Fort Rucker, brief stint at." "Cut the bullshit, Captain." Hartwell's voice dropped to a whisper. Blackbird 7749 Echo was a ghost operation, 12 years ago. Syria. Officially, no American forces were ever there. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Around them, the base continued its morning rhythm. Mechanics shouting, engines warming up, the distant sound of boots on tarmac. But in this small bubble between the Apache's landing gear, time seemed suspended. Raven's eyes met his directly for the first time since he'd arrived. They were darker than he'd noticed before, carrying weight that didn't match her personnel file. "Sir, I think there's been some confusion." The pilot who flew that mission was listed as KIA. Hartwell studied her face, looking for cracks in whatever mask she was wearing. Body never recovered, officially died in a training accident 3 months later. She finally broke eye contact, returning her attention to the weapon system. Her movements were precise, mechanical, but Hartwell could see her hands weren't quite steady. "People make mistakes with paperwork all the time, Commander." But they both knew better. In the distance, an F-16 screamed across the sky, its engines drowning out whatever secrets hung in the air between them. The maintenance crew chief walked over, tablet in hand, completely oblivious to the tension. "Ma'am, your bird's scheduled for a full systems check in 20. Heard there might be something special brewing for tonight." Raven nodded without looking at him, but Hartwell caught the slight tightening around her eyes. Whatever operation was coming, she already knew about it. The question was, how? As the crew chief walked away, Hartwell made a decision that would change everything. "Captain Delacroix, I need you in my office. Now." She finally turned to face him fully, and for just a moment he saw something flicker across her features, not fear but something deeper. Recognition, maybe, or resignation. "Of course, sir." Her voice was steady, professional, but as she followed him across the tarmac, Hartwell noticed she walked like someone who'd learned to move silently through hostile territory. The morning heat was already building, promising another scorching Afghan day. But inside the operations building, the air conditioning hummed steadily, creating an artificial coolness that felt more ominous than comfortable. Hartwell's office was sparse, functional, a metal desk, 2 chairs, and walls covered with maps and flight schedules. But today, he pulled down the blinds before closing the door. "Sit," he said, moving to his computer. His fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing databases that required clearance levels most people never knew existed. Raven remained standing. "Sir, if this is about the etching on the gun, I can explain." Can you? Hartwell's screen filled with classified documents, photos, mission reports that were supposed to be buried so deep they'd never see light again. And there, in a grainy surveillance photo from 12 years ago, was a face he recognized. The woman in the photo wore different gear, had shorter hair, and looked about 5 years younger. But the eyes were unmistakable. Dark, intelligent, carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much too young. Lieutenant Miranda Vasquez, he read from the file. Call sign, Blackbird, declared killed in action during Operation Silent Thunder, Syria, March 15th, age 26. He looked up at the woman standing in front of him. Funny thing about ghosts, Captain. Sometimes they forget to stay dead. For the first time since he'd known her, Raven, or Miranda, or whatever her real name was, smiled. It wasn't a happy expression. You always were thorough, Commander. I remember that about you. The words hit him like a physical blow. She remembered him, which meant. Kandahar wasn't your first deployment here either, he said slowly. You were here in 09. Different name, different unit, but you were here. She moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the flight line where her Apache sat waiting. Hartwell, Jackson T. Major at the time, if I recall. You commanded the 160th Sword Detachment that provided our extraction after Silent Thunder went sideways. The memories came flooding back. The desperate radio call in the middle of the night. The pilot who'd somehow kept a shot-up little bird in the air long enough to get her team out of Syria before the world knew they'd ever been there. He'd never seen her face. She'd been wearing a flight helmet, and by the time they'd made it back to the forward operating base, she'd already been whisked away by people who didn't give names or explanations. You saved my life, she continued, still watching the aircraft outside. My team's lives. And then, 3 months later, Miranda Vasquez died in a training accident. Very convenient for everyone involved. Why? The question came out rougher than he intended. Why fake your death? Why disappear? She turned back to face him, and now he could see the full weight of 12 years carried in her posture. Because Silent Thunder wasn't just about intelligence gathering. We found something in Syria. Something that certain people decided was too dangerous for even black ops. Outside, a helicopter roared to life, but neither of them moved. They were locked in this moment, in this revelation that was rewriting everything Hartwell thought he knew about his best pilot. What did you find? He asked. Raven reached into her flight suit and pulled out a small device, something that looked like a modified GPS unit, but with electronics he didn't recognize. The future of warfare, Commander, and the reason I've been running from shadows for 12 years. The radio crackled to life from his desk. All flight crews to Briefing Room Alpha. Priority mission briefing in 10 minutes. They looked at each other across the small office, both understanding that whatever was about to happen, the past had finally caught up with them. Hartwell moved toward the radio to acknowledge, but Raven's voice stopped him. Commander, that mission tonight, it's not what they're going to tell you it is. His hand froze over the radio. What do you mean? I mean the reason I'm here, the reason Miranda Vasquez had to die, is sitting in that briefing room right now, waiting to send good people into a trap. The weight of command, of responsibility, of 12 years of unanswered questions, all came crashing down on Hartwell in that moment. He looked at this woman, this ghost from a classified operation, and realized that everything he thought he knew about his deployment, about his mission, about the war itself, was about to change. Then we better go find out what they're really after, he said, reaching for his service weapon out of habit. Raven watched him strap on his sidearm and smiled that same humorless smile. Commander, where we're going, bullets won't help, but that Apache out there might. The briefing room was exactly what you'd expect at a forward operating base in Afghanistan. Bare concrete walls, folding chairs arranged in rows, and a projection screen that had seen better years. What wasn't expected was the man in civilian clothes standing next to Colonel Martinez at the front of the room. Hartwell recognized him immediately, though they'd never been formally introduced. Thomas Kine, Defense Intelligence Agency. The kind of man who showed up when operations went from classified to never happened. When Hartwell had debriefed from the Syria extraction 12 years ago, Kine had been there, taking notes in the corner, asking questions that seemed unrelated to the mission. Raven took a seat in the back row, her posture relaxed but her eyes constantly scanning. She was counting exit routes, Hartwell realized, measuring distances, the habits of someone who'd learned to expect trouble from any direction. "Gentlemen," Colonel Martinez began, "ladies, we have a time-sensitive situation. Intelligence indicates a high-value target has been located in the Spin Bolduc district. Asset recovery mission, in and out, clean and quiet." The civilian stepped forward. "I'm Thomas Kine, DIA. This operation is classified above your current clearance levels, but you need to know that what we're recovering could change the balance of power in this region." Hartwell caught Raven's eye in his peripheral vision. She was staring at Kine with an intensity that could cut steel. "Captain Delacroix will be primary on this mission," Martinez continued. "Her record of clean operations makes her the obvious choice." Several of the male pilots exchanged glances. Captain Torres leaned over to whisper something to his wingman, who stifled a laugh. The cleaner was getting another babysitting job. But Kine was watching Raven carefully, too carefully. "Captain, I understand you've had experience with unusual recovery operations." The room went quiet. That wasn't the kind of question you asked in front of other personnel unless you were fishing for something. Raven's voice was steady as granite. "I follow orders, sir. Recover the asset, bring everyone home." "Of course." Kine's smile didn't reach his eyes. "This particular asset may be familiar to some of our more experienced personnel, technology that's been missing for quite some time." Hartwell felt his blood pressure spike. Missing technology, Syria, the device Raven had shown him in his office. The pieces were forming a picture he didn't like. "Mission brief is as follows." Martinez took back control of the briefing. 2 Apache gunships will provide overwatch while a ground team secures the site. Primary recovery team will be led by Captain Delacroix, with Captain Torres as backup. Torres straightened in his chair. "Sir, with respect, wouldn't it make more sense to have more experienced personnel leading this kind of operation?" The question hung in the air, and Hartwell could see the familiar dynamic playing out. Torres was a good pilot, but he'd never gotten over the fact that a woman had consistently outperformed him in every metric that mattered. "Captain Delacroix has more relevant experience than anyone in this room," Kine said quietly. "Trust me on that." Something in his tone made the room uncomfortable. Relevant experience with what, exactly? Raven spoke for the first time since identifying herself. "When do we launch?" "Sunset. Gives us cover of darkness for the approach." Martinez clicked to the next slide, showing aerial reconnaissance photos of a compound in the mountains. "Intel suggests minimal resistance, but we're going in prepared for anything." As the briefing continued with technical details, flight patterns, and contingency plans, Hartwell noticed that Raven had gone completely still. Not relaxed still. The kind of motionless that predators achieve right before they strike. When the briefing ended and personnel began filing out, Kine approached her directly. "Captain, a word." Hartwell lingered, pretending to review his notes, but positioned to hear their conversation. "It's been a long time," Kine said softly. "Not long enough," Raven replied. "We need to talk before the mission." "No, we don't." "Miranda." The name hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Several pilots were still within earshot, and Hartwell could see Raven calculating whether to cause a scene or play along. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said finally. "My name is Captain Raven Delacroix." Kine smiled that cold smile again. "Of course, my mistake, but we still need to talk." After the room cleared, Hartwell made his decision. He approached them both, his commander's authority giving him the right to insert himself into any conversation involving his personnel. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Kine looked at him with something that might have been annoyance. "No problem, Commander. Just discussing mission parameters with your best pilot." "Good, because I have some questions about this asset we're recovering." "I'm sure you do. Unfortunately, those answers are above your clearance level." It was a dismissal, pure and simple. But Hartwell had been dismissed by better men than Thomas Kine, and he'd learned when to push back. "This is my base, my personnel, my area of operations. Nothing happens here that's above my clearance level." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Raven was watching this exchange like a chess match, waiting to see which way the board would tip. "Commander Hartwell," Kine's voice carried the weight of authority that came from very high places, "I suggest you focus on your part of this mission and leave the bigger picture to those who have the full scope of what we're dealing with." "And what exactly are we dealing with?" Kine looked at Raven, then back at Hartwell. "Ghosts, Commander. We're dealing with ghosts." The hangar was quieter than usual as evening approached. Most of the day crew had finished their shifts, leaving only essential personnel and the flight crews preparing for the night mission. Raven stood beneath her Apache, running through her pre-flight checklist with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through more combat missions than anyone knew. Chief Warrant Officer Bobby Hernandez, her gunner, approached with his gear bag slung over his shoulder. He was young, maybe 24, with the kind of eagerness that reminded Raven uncomfortably of herself 12 years ago. "Ma'am, heard this one's a little different from our usual runs," he said, stowing his equipment in the cockpit. "They're all different, Hernandez. That's why we practice the basics until they're automatic." "Yes, ma'am, it's just. Well, the guys are saying this might be our last mission here. Deployment's almost over, and word is the unit's rotating stateside for retraining." Raven's hands paused on the weapons system check. Retraining usually meant new aircraft, new tactics, or new theaters of operation. Or it meant someone was trying to scatter personnel who might have seen too much. "Focus on tonight, Hernandez. Tomorrow will take care of itself." But as she said it, she caught sight of Thomas Kine crossing the hangar, flanked by two men in civilian clothes who were clearly military despite their attempt to blend in. Special operations, if she had to guess. The kind who specialized in making problems disappear. Hartwell emerged from the operations building, striding toward her with the purposeful gait of a man who'd made a decision. Behind him, Captain Torres and his gunner were conducting their own pre-flight, but Torres kept glancing over with an expression that mixed resentment with something else. Worry, maybe. "Delacroix," Hartwell called out. "Change of plans, I'm flying as your backup." Torres straightened up from his aircraft. "Sir, I'm already assigned as backup for this mission." "Not anymore. You're staying here as base security." The dismissal was clean and final, but Raven could see Tor's jaw working as he tried to decide whether to argue. In the end, military discipline won out, but his expression promised this conversation wasn't over. Kine approached the group with his security detail still maintaining their careful distance. "Commander, I don't think that's necessary. This should be a straightforward recovery operation." "Then you won't mind having experienced backup," Hartwell replied evenly. The two men stared at each other across 10 feet of hangar space, and Raven realized she was watching something more than a simple disagreement about mission parameters. This was personal, though she couldn't figure out how or why. "Fine," Kine said finally. "But understand that once we reach the target site, operational security becomes paramount. No unnecessary radio chatter, no deviations from the flight plan, and absolutely no independent action." "Of course," Hartwell said, but Raven caught the slight emphasis he put on the word unnecessary, and she knew he was already planning contingencies. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting the airfield in shades of orange and purple, the two Apache helicopters lifted off into the Afghan sky. Raven's aircraft took point, with Hartwell following at a distance that would allow him to provide covering fire if needed, but keep him out of the immediate danger zone. The flight to Spin Boldak took 47 minutes, following a route that kept them in valleys and behind ridgelines to avoid detection. The landscape below was harsh and beautiful in the fading light: rocky hills, scattered villages, and the ancient paths that had been used by traders and warriors for thousands of years. Nighthawk 1, this is Nighthawk 2, Hartwell's voice came through her headset. Visual on the target compound, looks quiet. Raven studied the structure below through her targeting system. It was larger than the intelligence photos had suggested, with multiple buildings surrounded by high walls. Too large for a simple weapons cache or even a high-value target's hideout. Nighthawk 2, I'm seeing vehicle activity on the north side. At least 3 trucks. Copy that, doesn't match the intel brief. In the back seat, Hernandez was scanning with the thermal imaging system. Ma'am, I'm getting heat signatures from multiple buildings. This place is definitely not abandoned. Raven keyed her radio to the mission frequency. Overwatch Control, Nighthawk 1. Target site shows significantly more activity than briefed. Request permission to abort and reassess. The response came back immediately in Thomas Kine's voice. Negative, Nighthawk 1. Proceed with mission as planned. Intel is current and accurate. But it wasn't. Raven had enough combat experience to recognize when intelligence was either outdated or deliberately misleading. The compound below looked like a working facility, not an abandoned site where stolen technology had been hidden. Nighthawk 2, are you seeing this? She asked on their private channel. Affirm, something's not right here. Raven made a decision that would have consequences she couldn't yet imagine. Instead of setting down at the designated landing zone, she initiated a wide reconnaissance orbit of the compound, using her aircraft's sensors to build a complete picture of what they were really facing. What she found made her blood run cold. The compound wasn't hiding stolen technology. It was manufacturing it. The heat signatures Hernandez had detected weren't from people. They were from industrial equipment running at high capacity. And in the largest building, her sensors detected the electromagnetic signature that she'd hoped never to encounter again. Overwatch Control, Nighthawk 1. I need to speak to Operational Command immediately. Nighthawk 1, you are ordered to proceed with the mission. Land at LZ Alpha and await ground team arrival. But Raven was already pulling her aircraft into a climbing turn, heading away from the compound. Negative, Overwatch. This mission is compromised. We're dealing with active manufacturing, not asset recovery. Kine's voice came back sharp and angry. Captain Delacroix, you are directly violating mission orders. Return to LZ Alpha immediately. Nighthawk 2, are you with me? She asked Hartwell. There was a pause that stretched for several seconds. Then, affirmative, Nighthawk 1, following your lead. The two Apache turned away from the compound, climbing toward the mountain ridges that would provide cover from ground-based weapons. But as they climbed, Raven's threat warning system began to chirp. Ma'am, Hernandez's voice was tight with concern. I'm picking up radar signatures, multiple aircraft approaching from the east. Raven checked her displays and felt her stomach drop. 4 aircraft, moving fast and low. The signatures matched Pakistani F-16s, but they were operating well inside Afghan airspace. Nighthawk 2, we have company. 4 fighters bearing 090, range 15 miles and closing. I see them. Nighthawk 1, what the hell is going on? But before Raven could answer, her radio crackled with a transmission on the international emergency frequency. Unidentified American aircraft, you have violated Pakistani airspace and are ordered to land immediately. Failure to comply will result in defensive action. The problem was, they weren't in Pakistani airspace. They were at least 20 miles inside Afghanistan, which meant either the Pakistani pilots were lying or someone had told them to lie. Overwatch Control, Nighthawk 1. We are being intercepted by Pakistani aircraft claiming airspace violation. Request immediate clarification of our position and diplomatic contact with Pakistani authorities. Silence. Overwatch Control, Nighthawk 1, do you copy? More silence. Hartwell's voice cut through the static. Nighthawk 1, I think we've been hung out to dry. The Pakistani F-16s were closing fast, and Raven had to make a choice. She could try to outrun them. The Apache was nimble and could use terrain masking, but the fighters were faster. She could try to fight. 2 attack helicopters against 4 air superiority fighters was suicide, but it might buy time for someone to figure out what was happening. Or she could try something else entirely. Hernandez, patch me through to the Pakistani lead aircraft on their tactical frequency. Ma'am, that frequency is classified. Do it. A few seconds later, her radio crackled with an unfamiliar voice speaking accented English. American aircraft, this is Pakistan Air Force flight leader. You will land immediately or be fired upon. Pakistani flight leader, this is Captain Raven Delacroix, United States Army. We are operating under classified authority in conjunction with your government. I need to speak to your commanding officer immediately. It was a bluff, but one based on 12 years of experience with black operations that existed in the gray areas between nations. There was a long pause. Then, American pilot, say again your identification. Captain Raven Delacroix, call sign Nighthawk. Authorization code Blackbird 7749 Echo. Another pause, longer this time. Raven could imagine the Pakistani pilot trying to decide whether to radio his base for confirmation or simply shoot down the American helicopters that had somehow ended up in the middle of a situation that was clearly more complicated than anyone had been told. American aircraft maintain current heading and altitude. Do not deviate, we are checking your authorization. Copy that, Pakistani flight leader. Hartwell's voice came through on their private channel. Blackbird authorization. I thought that operation was buried. It was, but apparently someone forgot to tell the Pakistanis. They flew in formation for several minutes. 2 Apache helicopters escorted by 4 F-16 fighters through the mountains of Afghanistan. It was surreal, and Raven found herself thinking that if anyone on the ground was watching, they'd assume it was some kind of joint training exercise. Finally, the Pakistani flight leader came back on the radio. American aircraft, you are cleared to continue your mission. Be advised that your support channels have been redirected. Copy that. Thank you for your assistance. Captain Delacroix, the Pakistani pilot's voice had changed, becoming more formal. You are requested to contact Falcon Base on frequency 127.35 when your current mission is complete. Raven felt a chill run down her spine. Falcon Base had been the code name for the forward operating base in Syria where Operation Silent Thunder had been coordinated. It shouldn't exist anymore. Acknowledged, Pakistani flight leader. The F-16s peeled away, disappearing into the gathering darkness, and suddenly the 2 Apache helicopters were alone again in the Afghan sky. Nighthawk 1, Hartwell's voice was carefully controlled. I think we need to have a very long conversation when we get back to base. Copy that, Nighthawk 2. But first, we need to figure out who just tried to get us killed and why. As they flew back toward Kandahar through the darkness, Raven realized that the past 12 years of running, of hiding, of being someone else, had just come to an end. Miranda Vasquez was officially back from the dead, and this time, she wasn't going to disappear quietly. The flight back to Kandahar gave Raven time to think, and what she was thinking about was the expression on Thomas Kine's face when she'd used the Blackbird authorization code. He'd gone pale, then angry, then something else entirely, something that looked like fear. Hartwell had maintained radio silence for most of the return flight, but as they approached the airfield, his voice crackled through her headset. Nighthawk 1, we're going to have a welcoming committee. Raven could see what he meant. The hangar area was lit up like a Christmas tree, with more vehicles than usual clustered around the operations building. Security personnel were visible at intervals that suggested they were expecting trouble rather than just providing routine base security. Nighthawk 2, I'm thinking we don't land at our usual spot. Agreed. I know a maintenance area on the far side of the field, less visibility. They set down near a collection of storage buildings and supply depots, well away from the main flight operations area. As the engines wound down and the rotors slowed to a stop, Raven could see Hartwell climbing out of his aircraft with the purposeful movements of a man who'd made a decision he might regret. "Ma'am," Hernandez said as he completed his post-flight checks, "was that mission as screwed up as it felt?" "More screwed up," Raven replied. "Hernandez, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it without asking questions." "Yes, ma'am." She handed him the modified GPS device she'd shown Hartwell earlier. "Take this to Chief Martinez in communications. Tell him it's from Blackbird and that he needs to upload the data to the emergency cache. He'll know what that means." Hernandez took the device, clearly wanting to ask the dozen questions that were written across his face, but military discipline won out. "Yes, ma'am. Anything else?" "Yeah, after you deliver that, find somewhere else to be for the next couple of hours. And Hernandez, if anyone asks, you don't know where we landed and you never saw that device." As her gunner disappeared into the maze of storage buildings, Hartwell approached with 2 cups of coffee from somewhere, and an expression that suggested he'd been doing some hard thinking during their flight. "So," he said, handing her one of the cups, "Miranda Vasquez, ghost pilot from a black op that never happened. Want to tell me how Captain Raven Delacroix ended up in my unit?" The coffee was terrible, but it was hot and caffeine, and Raven realized she was going to need both for what was coming. "It's a long story. We've got time. Kine and his people are going to be looking for us, but they'll start with the flight line and work their way out. Gives us maybe an hour before they think to check over here." Raven sat on a stack of supply crates and stared out at the lights of the base. In the distance, she could see vehicles moving with the purposeful patterns of a search operation. "The technology we found in Syria," she began, "it wasn't just advanced weapons systems. It was something else entirely. Quantum communication arrays, artificial intelligence systems that could predict enemy movements days in advance, energy weapons that made everything in our arsenal look like stone knives." Hartwell sat across from her on another crate. "Where did it come from?" "That's the billion-dollar question. The site we raided was supposed to be a Syrian government research facility, but the technology we found there was decades ahead of anything Syria could have developed. Hell, it was decades ahead of anything we could have developed." "So where?" "We think it was Chinese, or Russian, or both, working together on something so far beyond current military technology that it would have made the Cold War look like a playground disagreement." She sipped the awful coffee and continued. "My team's job was to document everything, collect samples, and get out before anyone knew we'd been there. Simple intelligence gathering. But something went wrong. Everything went wrong. The facility wasn't abandoned like intelligence suggested. It was fully operational, with security that was expecting us. Not expecting Americans specifically, but expecting someone, like they'd been warned." Hartwell was quiet for a moment, processing. "So you think there was a leak?" "I know there was a leak. The question was where it came from and how high up it went." In the distance, a helicopter took off from the main flight line, its searchlight sweeping the ground in systematic patterns, looking for them. The extraction you performed, Raven continued, got my team out, but not before we'd learned some things that certain people didn't want us to know. Within a week, we were all reassigned to different units, different bases, different continents. Within a month, my team leader died in a car accident in Germany. My communications specialist had a heart attack at age 28. My demolitions expert fell off a cliff during a training exercise. Jesus. That's when I knew Miranda Vasquez had to die, officially, permanently, and convincingly. So I arranged a training accident, walked away from everything I'd ever been, and became someone else. The searchlight swept closer to their position, and they both instinctively moved deeper into the shadows between the storage buildings. "Why the army?" Hartwell asked. "Why not just disappear completely?" Because running wasn't enough. I needed to understand what we'd found in Syria, and I needed to make sure it never got used against American soldiers. The device I gave Hernandez contains 12 years of research, intelligence gathering, and very careful documentation of who knew what and when they knew it. And now, Raven stood up, checking her sidearm out of habit. Now someone's trying to clean up loose ends. That compound we saw tonight, it's not manufacturing the technology we found in Syria. It's manufacturing improved versions of it. And based on what my sensors detected, they're about 6 months away from having weapons that could change the balance of power in this entire region. The helicopter with the searchlight was getting closer, and they could hear vehicles approaching from the direction of the main base. "So what do we do?" Hartwell asked. "We finish what Miranda Vasquez started 12 years ago," Raven said. "We make sure the truth gets out, and we make sure the people responsible for getting good soldiers killed pay for what they've done. And if Kine and his people find us first." Raven smiled, and for the first time since Hartwell had known her, it was a genuinely predatory expression. "Commander, I've been playing dead for 12 years while staying one step ahead of people who have unlimited resources and no conscience. Thomas Kine is good, but he's not that good." The searchlight suddenly swung in their direction, and they pressed themselves against the wall of the storage building. But instead of the blinding glare they expected, the light swept past without pausing. "Ma'am," Hernandez's voice came from the darkness nearby. "Chief Martinez says to tell you that Blackbird has been activated, and that Falcon Base is online." Raven felt something she hadn't experienced in 12 years. Hope. Falcon Base wasn't just a Pakistani code name. It was an entire network of intelligence assets that she'd thought had been destroyed along with Operation Silent Thunder. "Hernandez, tell Chief Martinez that Nighthawk is ready for Phase 2. "Phase 2 of what, ma'am?" "Phase 2 of finishing a war that started 12 years ago." The communications bunker at Kandahar Airfield was buried deep enough to survive everything short of a direct nuclear strike, and heavily shielded enough to prevent any electronic surveillance from detecting what happened inside. Chief Master Sergeant Carlos Martinez had been running secure communications for Black operations longer than most of the pilots on base had been in the military, and he'd learned to ask questions only when the answers might keep people alive. When Hernandez had delivered the device with the Blackbird authentication, Martinez had felt the same chill he'd experienced 12 years ago when a young lieutenant named Miranda Vasquez had first walked into his communications center in Syria with authorization codes that came directly from the Pentagon's most classified levels. Now, at 200 hours, he was establishing contact with network nodes that officially didn't exist, using protocols that had theoretically been destroyed after Operation Silent Thunder was terminated. "Falcon Base, this is Kandahar Control. Authentication Blackbird 7749 Echo, requesting immediate conference with Operational Command." The response came through encrypted channels that bounced the signal off 3 different satellites before reaching his equipment. "Kandahar Control, Falcon Base. Authentication confirmed. Stand by for Pegasus 6. Martinez had never heard the call sign Pegasus 6, but the encryption protocols were legitimate, and the voice that came through a few moments later carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected national security. Chief Martinez, this is General Patricia Hawthorne, Defense Intelligence Agency. I understand we have a Blackbird situation. Martinez nearly dropped his coffee. General Hawthorne was a legend in the intelligence community, the woman who'd built half of America's black operations infrastructure and then disappeared into the deepest levels of the Pentagon's classified world. Yes, ma'am. Etched is requesting immediate extraction and protection for intelligence data that may compromise ongoing operations. Understood, Chief. I need you to establish a secure link to Captain Delacroix's location. And Martinez, everything that happens in the next 12 hours is classified at levels that don't have names. Are we clear? Crystal clear, ma'am. Meanwhile, in the storage area where Raven and Hartwell were hiding, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The search teams had expanded their pattern, and it was only a matter of time before someone decided to check the maintenance sectors systematically. We can't stay here, Hartwell said, watching another helicopter sweep across their position. They're going to find us eventually. Raven was studying the base layout on her tactical display, looking for options that didn't involve shooting their way out. There's a supply convoy leaving for Bagram at 300, if we can get to the motor pool. Too risky, too many checkpoints, too many people who might recognize us. Then we go up. Hartwell looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Up where? She pointed toward the communications tower that rose above the bunker complex. Martinez has portable satellite communication gear up there for redundancy. If we can reach it, we can establish direct contact with whoever's running the Falcon network. That's a 100-foot climb with no cover. It's also the last place they'll look for us. Before Hartwell could argue, Hernandez materialized out of the darkness again. Ma'am, Chief Martinez says to tell you that Pegasus 6 is online and wants to talk to you directly. Raven felt her pulse spike. Pegasus 6 was a call sign she hadn't heard in 12 years, but one she'd never forgotten. General Patricia Hawthorne had been the architect of Operation Silent Thunder, and if she was involved now, it meant the situation was even more serious than Raven had thought. Where? Communications bunker, ma'am. But there's a problem. Mr. Kine has security teams covering all the main entrances. Raven looked at Hartwell, then at the communications tower looming above them. Hernandez, can you get us to the base of that tower without being seen? Maybe, but ma'am, what about my gunner certification exam tomorrow? I mean later today. For a moment, Raven saw herself at his age, worried about career progression and performance evaluations, while the world shifted around her in ways she couldn't understand. Hernandez, if we don't figure out what's happening tonight, there might not be a tomorrow to worry about. The young warrant officer's expression grew serious. Yes, ma'am, follow me. They moved through the shadows between buildings, using routes that Hernandez had probably learned during his off-duty explorations of the base. The kid was good. He understood cover and concealment instinctively, and he had the patience to wait for security patrols to pass before moving to the next position. 20 minutes later, they were crouched at the base of the communications tower. Up close, it looked even taller than it had from a distance, a steel lattice structure that climbed into the darkness above the floodlights that illuminated the base perimeter. Ma'am, Hernandez whispered, are you sure about this? That tower isn't exactly designed for climbing. Raven was already checking the rungs welded to the tower's legs. They were solid, but spaced for maintenance personnel with proper safety equipment, not for combat-equipped soldiers trying to avoid detection. Hartwell, you don't have to do this. This is my mission, my responsibility. Like hell it is. He was already removing unnecessary equipment from his gear vest. "I've been part of this since I pulled your team out of Syria 12 years ago. Besides, someone needs to watch your back." They began the climb, moving slowly and quietly. Every 20 feet, they paused to listen for signs that they'd been detected. The base continued its normal nighttime operations below them, security patrols following their regular routes, aircraft maintenance continuing under floodlights, the routine sounds of a military installation that never truly slept. At the 60-foot level, Raven's radio earpiece crackled to life with a signal so faint she almost missed it. "Blackbird, this is Pegasus 6. If you can hear this transmission, key your radio twice." Raven pressed her transmit button twice in quick succession. "Blackbird, maintain radio silence but continue to monitor this frequency. We have a situation developing that requires your immediate attention." They continued climbing, and at the 80-foot level, Hartwell grabbed her ankle to stop her progress. Below them, a security team was conducting a detailed search of the storage area where they'd been hiding 20 minutes earlier. 4 men with automatic weapons and night vision equipment, moving with the systematic precision of professionals. "Too close," Hartwell breathed. But they were also too exposed to climb back down without being seen. They pressed themselves against the tower structure and waited, hoping that no one would think to look up. The search team spent 15 minutes going through every building, every storage container, every possible hiding place in their former location. Finally, the team leader's voice carried clearly in the still air. "Area clear. Moving to Section 7. As the security team disappeared between the buildings, Raven and Hartwell resumed their climb. At the 100-foot level, they reached the maintenance platform where Chief Martinez kept his backup communication equipment. The gear was more sophisticated than Raven had expected, not just standard military radio equipment, but advanced satellite communication systems that could punch through any electronic countermeasures and establish secure links anywhere in the world. She activated the system and immediately heard General Hawthorne's voice. "Blackbird, Pegasus 6, we have a priority situation developing. Your presence at that compound tonight triggered a response from assets we've been tracking for 12 years. "Pegasus 6, Blackbird, what kind of response?" "The technology you discovered in Syria has been used to establish manufacturing facilities in 7 countries: Pakistan, Afghanistan, Syria, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, and 1 location we haven't been able to identify. Each facility is producing weapons systems that could destabilize entire regions." Raven felt the pieces clicking together. The compound tonight was just one node in a larger network. "Correct, and your presence there has alerted the entire network that Operation Silent Thunder survivors are still active. Within the last 2 hours, we've detected increased activity at all 7 facilities. They're accelerating production schedules." Hartwell leaned closer to the radio. "General, this is Commander Hartwell. What's the current threat assessment?" "Commander, based on our analysis, we estimate that weapons from these facilities will be operational within 6 months. Energy weapons that can disable aircraft from 50 miles away. Electronic warfare systems that can shut down entire military bases. Artificial intelligence systems that can predict and counter every tactical move we make." The implications hit Raven like a physical blow. They're building a new kind of military force, one that makes conventional armies obsolete. "That's our assessment. And Blackbird, the people funding and coordinating these facilities include assets within our own government. Thomas Kine is just the operational level. This goes much higher." Below them, more security teams were visible, expanding their search pattern. It was only a matter of time before someone thought to check the communications tower. "General, what do you need from us?" "The data you've collected over the past 12 years contains locations, personnel records, financial networks, and operational details that we need to shut down this entire operation. But we need more than intelligence. We need direct action. Ma'am, 2 pilots and a handful of support personnel can't take on an international conspiracy. You're not alone, Blackbird. We've been rebuilding the Falcon network for the past 5 years, waiting for the right moment to act. That moment is now. Suddenly, the platform shook as someone began climbing the tower below them. Heavy boots on metal rungs, moving fast and purposefully. Pegasus 6, we have company. Understood. Blackbird, there's a supply helicopter landing at grid coordinates I'm transmitting to your GPS. It will extract you to a secure facility where you can upload your data and receive a full briefing on Phase 2 operations. Raven checked her GPS display. The coordinates were for a landing zone about 2 miles outside the base perimeter. Copy coordinates, but General, getting there is going to be interesting. Use whatever means necessary. The future of American military supremacy depends on the information you're carrying. The climbing sounds below were getting closer. Whoever was coming up had made it past the 50-foot level and was still ascending. Hartwell, we need to go, now. But as they prepared to begin their descent on the far side of the tower, away from the approaching security team, Hartwell grabbed her arm. Look, he said, pointing toward the main airfield. 3 helicopters were taking off simultaneously, their searchlights creating overlapping patterns of illumination that covered every possible escape route from the base. And in the hangar area, vehicles were moving with military precision toward predetermined positions. They're not just looking for us anymore, Raven realized. They're locking down the entire base. General Hawthorne's voice crackled through the radio. Blackbird, be advised that Kine has convinced Base Command that you're foreign agents attempting to steal classified technology. You are now considered hostile combatants. Understood, Pegasus 6, if we don't make it to that extraction point. You'll make it, Blackbird. You've survived 12 years of impossible situations. This is just one more. The climber below had reached the 80-foot level, and they could hear radio chatter as he reported their location to the search teams. Raven made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who hadn't spent 12 years living on borrowed time. Instead of climbing down, she began moving horizontally along the tower's support cables, using them like a zip line to reach the adjacent antenna array. Are you out of your mind? Hartwell hissed. Probably, but it's worked so far. He followed her lead, and together they descended the antenna structure on the far side of the communications complex. By the time the security team reached the maintenance platform, they were already moving through the shadows toward the base perimeter. But as they reached the fence line, Raven's radio crackled with a transmission that made her blood run cold. All units, be advised that Captain Raven Delacroix is actually Lieutenant Miranda Vasquez, a foreign intelligence operative who has been gathering classified information for 12 years. She is to be considered extremely dangerous and is authorized to be engaged with lethal force. The voice was Thomas Kynes, but the authority behind the transmission came from much higher levels of command. Well, Hartwell said grimly, I guess we're officially the bad guys now. The 2-mile journey from Kandahar airfield to the extraction coordinates took them through terrain that was simultaneously familiar and alien. Familiar because they'd flown over it hundreds of times. Alien because experiencing it on foot, in darkness, while being hunted by their own military, transformed every ridge and valley into a potential trap. They moved in tactical formation, with Raven taking point and Hartwell covering their rear approach. The skills came back automatically, reading terrain for cover and concealment, timing their movements to avoid the search helicopters that continued to sweep the area, using every piece of available darkness to mask their progress. Movement 2 o'clock, Hartwell whispered into his radio. Raven dropped prone and scanned the area through her night vision scope. A patrol of 4 soldiers was moving along a ridge about 400 meters away, but their route would intersect with the extraction point unless she and Hartwell changed course. "Local security or hunting us specifically?" she asked. "Hard to tell. Their spacing suggests they're looking for something specific, but they're not using the search pattern you'd expect for fugitive recovery." They watched the patrol for several minutes, noting the rhythm of their movement, the way they checked certain areas more carefully than others. These weren't soldiers looking for escaped personnel. These were soldiers looking for something they'd been told was extremely dangerous. "Base security has been told we're foreign agents," Raven realized. "They're not trying to capture us. They're trying to eliminate a threat to national security." The extraction point was a small valley between 2 ridges, with enough flat space for a helicopter to land, but enough cover to conceal the operation from casual observation. When they reached the designated coordinates, however, there was no aircraft waiting. Raven checked her GPS again, confirming their position, then keyed her radio. "Pegasus 6, Blackbird is at extraction coordinates. No aircraft visible. Blackbird, extraction has been delayed due to increased security in your area. Stand by for alternate instructions." "Copy. Be advised, we have limited time before local security locates our position." As if summoned by her words, the sound of helicopter rotors began to echo off the surrounding hills. Not the distinctive wop-wop of an American A-60, but the higher-pitched whine of something smaller and more agile. "That's not one of ours," Hartwell said, raising his weapon. The aircraft that appeared over the ridge was indeed unfamiliar. A sleek helicopter with no visible military markings, painted in matte black that made it nearly invisible against the night sky. It settled into the valley with the precision of a pilot who knew exactly what he was doing. 2 figures emerged from the aircraft, wearing gear that was clearly military but with no visible unit insignia or national identification. They approached with weapons ready but not directly threatening. "Captain Delacroix." The voice belonged to a woman, mid-30s, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to dangerous operations. "That's me. Colonel Sarah Chen, Intelligence Support Activity. Will your ride out of here?" Raven had heard of ISA, the Pentagon's most secret intelligence unit, responsible for operations that were too sensitive even for Special Operations Command. If they were involved, the situation had just escalated to levels she hadn't imagined. "How do we know you're legitimate?" Hartwell asked. Chen smiled and keyed a radio frequency that Raven recognized. "Blackbird, this is Pegasus 6. Colonel Chen is authorized for your extraction. Trust her completely." General Hawthorne's voice was unmistakable, even through the encrypted channel. As they boarded the unmarked helicopter, Raven caught sight of the pilot's face in the cockpit lighting. She was young, maybe 25, but her eyes held the focus of someone who'd been flying combat missions for years. "Where are we going?" Raven asked as the aircraft lifted off. "Somewhere safe," Chen replied. "Somewhere we can have a very long conversation about what you've learned over the past 12 years and what we're going to do about it." The helicopter flew low and fast, using terrain masking to avoid detection by the search aircraft that were still sweeping the area around Kandahar. After 30 minutes, they set down at what appeared to be an abandoned compound in the mountains. But as they approached the buildings, Raven could see that the abandonment was carefully maintained camouflage. The facility was fully operational, with communications equipment, briefing rooms, and personnel who moved with the quiet efficiency of a unit that had been preparing for this moment for years. General Hawthorne was waiting in the main briefing room, and seeing her in person after 12 years was like encountering a ghost from a previous life. She was older, with gray hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of years spent making impossible decisions, but her presence still commanded immediate attention. Miranda, she said, using the name that Raven had thought was buried forever. It's good to see you alive. General, I have to admit, I thought the Falcon network was finished 12 years ago. It was, but we rebuilt it, carefully and quietly, because we knew this day would come. Hawthorne gestured to a conference table where files, photographs, and technical diagrams were spread out like pieces of a massive puzzle. What you discovered in Syria was just the beginning. What we've learned since then will reshape how you think about this entire conflict. Raven approached the table and immediately recognized some of the technology in the photographs. Energy weapons systems, quantum communication arrays, artificial intelligence interfaces, all more advanced than what her team had found 12 years ago. How many facilities are we talking about? She asked. 17 confirmed, with possibly more that we haven't located yet. 7 are actively manufacturing weapons systems. The others appear to be research and development sites. Hartwell studied a satellite photograph of what appeared to be a massive underground complex. Who's funding this? Who has the resources to build 17 secret facilities across 7 countries? That, General Hawthorne said, is where things get complicated. She activated a projection system, and the wall filled with organizational charts, financial networks, and personnel records that painted a picture Raven had never imagined. The funding comes from a consortium of private military contractors, weapons manufacturers, and intelligence services from multiple countries. But the coordination, the technology transfer, the operational planning, that's being managed by a group of individuals who have been working together for over 20 years. One of the names on the organizational chart made Raven's blood run cold: Thomas Kine. He's been part of this from the beginning. Not just part of it, he's one of the founders. The operation in Syria 12 years ago wasn't intelligence gathering, Miranda. It was a field test. Your team was sent in to see how the technology performed against experienced American operators. The implications hit her like a physical blow. We were guinea pigs. You were test subjects. And when you performed better than expected, when you gathered intelligence that revealed the scope of what they were building, you became liabilities that needed to be eliminated. Raven sank into a chair, trying to process the revelation that everything she'd believed about Operation Silent Thunder was a lie. The extraction, the mission briefing, the intelligence that led us to that facility, all of it was designed to test their weapons systems. All of it. And Commander Hartwell's extraction of your team wasn't part of the plan. You were supposed to die in Syria, along with any evidence of what you discovered. Hartwell's voice was tight with anger. So everything we've done for the past 12 years, every mission, every deployment, we've been working for people who tried to get us killed. Not everyone. The military, the government, most of the intelligence community, they're all legitimate. But there's a shadow network operating within legitimate institutions, using official resources to build a private military capability that answers to no government and follows no international law. General Hawthorne pulled up another set of files, these containing financial records and personnel movements that showed the scope of the conspiracy. The plan is elegant and terrifying. Use official military and intelligence resources to develop advanced weapons systems, then manufacture those systems in secret facilities around the world. When the technology reaches operational capability, reveal its existence and offer it for sale to the highest bidders. Creating a new arms race, Raven realized. Creating a new form of warfare entirely. Nations won't fight each other with conventional armies. They'll purchase military capabilities from private contractors who have no national loyalty and no legal accountability. The room fell silent as the full implications of what they were facing became clear. This wasn't just about advanced weapons systems or even international terrorism. This was about the fundamental restructuring of how wars would be fought in the 21st century. "What's our mission?" Raven asked finally. General Hawthorne smiled, and for the first time in 12 years, Raven saw something in that expression that looked like hope. "Our mission, Captain Vasquez, is to shut down every one of those 17 facilities and expose every person involved in this conspiracy. And we're going to do it using the one thing they never expected. Which is the people they thought they'd killed 12 years ago." The briefing continued for 6 hours, and with each revelation, the scope of what they were facing became more staggering. The Shadow Network had infiltrated military commands, intelligence agencies, and defense contractors in a dozen countries. They had assets in the Pentagon, the CIA, and congressional oversight committees. They had unlimited funding, advanced technology, and no legal constraints on their operations. But they also had weaknesses. "The network requires absolute secrecy to function," General Hawthorne explained. "They can't risk exposure because their entire model depends on legitimate institutions not knowing what they're doing. If we can force them into the open, if we can make their operations visible to the people they've been deceiving, the network collapses." Colonel Chen spread out a series of mission profiles across the conference table. "We have strike teams prepared to hit 12 of the 17 facilities simultaneously. Special operations personnel, CIA assets, and military units from allied countries who have been briefed on the situation." "What about the other 5 facilities?" Hartwell asked. "Those are the problem sites," Hawthorne replied. "They're located in areas where conventional military operations would trigger international incidents: North Korea, Iran, and 3 locations that are technically on American soil but operated by private contractors with legitimate security clearances." Raven studied the mission profiles, noting the complexity of coordinating simultaneous operations across multiple countries and time zones. "This is going to require perfect timing and flawless execution. If even one facility gets advance warning, they'll alert the entire network." "Which is why we need you," Chen said. "You know their operational patterns, their security protocols, their personnel. More importantly, you know how they think." "I know how Thomas Kine thinks, but this network is bigger than just him." "True, but Kine is the operational coordinator. If we can neutralize him and his immediate team, the network loses its ability to coordinate defensive responses." General Hawthorne activated another display, this one showing real-time intelligence from surveillance assets positioned around key facilities. "We estimate we have a 72-hour window before they complete security upgrades that will make these facilities nearly impregnable. After that, a conventional military assault would require resources equivalent to a major war. So we hit them now, all at once, and hope we get them before they can adapt." "Not hope, Miranda. Plan. Execute. Succeed. Because if we fail, in 6 months they'll have weapons systems that make nuclear arsenals look like fireworks displays." The meeting broke up into smaller planning sessions, with different teams focusing on specific aspects of the operation. Raven found herself assigned to the team tasked with neutralizing the 3 American facilities, a mission that would require infiltrating installations protected by legitimate security agencies who believed they were defending national security assets. As the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded her of countless dawns in Afghanistan, Raven realized that the war she'd been fighting for 12 years was about to end. One way or another, in the next 72 hours, either the Shadow Network would be destroyed, or it would become powerful enough to reshape the entire world. "Nervous?" Hartwell asked, joining her on the observation deck where she'd gone to watch the sunrise. "Terrified," she admitted. 12 years ago, I was a lieutenant following orders and trying to stay alive. Now I'm supposed to help coordinate an operation that could prevent the next world war or trigger it." You've been preparing for this your entire career. All those missions, all that intelligence gathering, all those years of staying ahead of people who wanted you dead, it was all leading to this moment. She looked at him, this man who'd saved her life 12 years ago and was now preparing to risk his life again for a mission that most people would never know had happened. Why are you here, Hartwell? You could have stayed at Kandahar, filed a report about a pilot who went rogue, and continued your career without any of this. Because 12 years ago, I pulled a team out of Syria, and that team included the best pilot I'd ever worked with. Someone who'd risked everything to gather intelligence that could save American lives. I'm not about to abandon that pilot now. The morning briefing began at 800 hours, with final mission assignments and equipment distribution. Raven was issued gear that looked standard but incorporated technology she'd never seen before. Communication systems that were immune to electronic countermeasures, weapons that could penetrate any known armor, and surveillance equipment that could track targets through any concealment. "Where does this technology come from?" she asked Colonel Chen. "Same place theirs does. The difference is we're using it to preserve legitimate government authority, not to replace it." The irony wasn't lost on her. They were going to use the enemy's own advanced technology to defeat them. At 1200 hours, teams began deploying to staging areas around the world. Some traveled by official military aircraft, others by civilian contractors, and a few by methods that didn't appear in any official transportation manifests. Raven's team consisted of herself, Hartwell, Colonel Chen, and 6 operators from the Intelligence Support Activity, whose personnel files were classified so far above her clearance level that she wasn't even allowed to know their real names. Their target was a facility in Nevada that officially didn't exist, but was producing energy weapons for defensive research purposes. The facility was protected by private security contractors who believed they were guarding legitimate government assets, which meant the assault team couldn't simply attack without risking the lives of innocent personnel. "We go in quiet," Chen explained during the final briefing. "Infiltrate, document, collect evidence, and extract key personnel for questioning. No casualties unless absolutely necessary." "And if they resist?" asked one of the ISA operators. "Then we adapt. But remember, these people think they're defending America. They're not the enemy. They're victims of the same deception that's been manipulating legitimate institutions for 20 years. The flight to Nevada took place in a civilian aircraft that had been modified with military communication equipment and defensive systems. As they flew over the desert landscape, Raven found herself thinking about the path that had led her to this moment. 12 years ago, she'd been a young pilot following orders and believing in the mission she'd been given. Tonight, she would be leading an assault on American soil against a facility protected by American security personnel, in service of a mission that most of the government didn't know existed. "Second thoughts?" Chen asked, settling into the seat beside her. "Constant second thoughts, but not about the mission, about whether we're already too late." "We're not too late, Miranda. We're exactly on time." As the sun set behind them, painting the sky in brilliant colors that reminded her of every sunset she'd watched from military bases around the world, Raven felt something she hadn't experienced in 12 years. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The war that had started with Operation Silent Thunder was about to end. And this time, the good guys were going to win. The Nevada facility appeared on their thermal imaging systems as a cluster of heat signatures in the desert, connected by underground tunnels that created a maze of defensive positions. The official designation was Desert Research Station Alpha, but the intelligence briefings had identified it as Prometheus Base, one of the 3 American facilities producing weapons systems for the Shadow Network. Raven's team set down 5 miles from the target, using a landing zone that kept them below the horizon from the facility's surveillance systems. The approach would be on foot, through terrain that provided concealment, but would take them 3 hours to traverse. As they moved through the darkness, Colonel Chen provided continuous updates through their encrypted communication system. Bravo Team has reached their target in Colorado. Charlie Team is 30 minutes out from the Virginia facility. All international teams report ready for synchronized assault. The coordination required for 17 simultaneous operations was staggering, but somehow it was working. Teams in Pakistan, Syria, Iran, and North Korea were all moving into position, ready to strike at precisely 300 GMT. "Movement ahead," whispered one of the ISA operators. Through her night vision scope, Raven could see a two-man security patrol following a predetermined route around the facility perimeter. They were professionals, alert, well-equipped, and clearly experienced. But they were also predictable, following patterns that allowed the assault team to avoid detection. "Perimeter security is routine," she reported to Chen. "They're not expecting trouble." "Copy that. Remember, these people think they're protecting legitimate research. Minimum force necessary." As they reached the outer fence, Raven realized that the facility was larger than the intelligence estimates had suggested. The surface buildings were just the visible portion of a complex that extended deep underground, with vehicle entrances that could accommodate heavy equipment and personnel areas that suggested a workforce in the hundreds. "This isn't a research facility," Hartwell observed. "This is a manufacturing plant." Chen studied the layout through her electronic surveillance equipment. Underground thermal signatures indicate active production lines. Whatever they're building down there, they're building a lot of it. The infiltration began at 2:45 GMT, with 15 minutes remaining until the synchronized assault. Using electronic countermeasures that were more advanced than anything Raven had ever seen, the team disabled the facility's security sensors and communication systems without triggering any alarms. But as they moved deeper into the complex, following service tunnels that led to the underground production areas, Raven began to notice details that didn't match the mission briefing. The equipment was more sophisticated than expected, the security more extensive, and the layout suggested operational capabilities that went far beyond weapons manufacturing. "Chen," she whispered into her radio, "I think we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "This facility isn't just producing weapons. It's producing complete military systems. Aircraft, vehicles, communication networks, everything you'd need to equip a private army." They reached an observation point that allowed them to look down into the main production area, and what they saw confirmed Raven's worst fears. The facility wasn't just manufacturing weapons for sale to foreign governments. It was building a private military force that could operate independently of any national authority. "Control, this is Team Alpha," Chen reported. "Target facility is significantly larger and more capable than intelligence suggested. Recommend immediate extraction and reassessment." But the response that came back wasn't from General Hawthorne or any other authorized command authority. The voice was Thomas Kynes, and he sounded almost amused. "Team Alpha, this is Overwatch Control. We've been expecting you." The lights in the production facility suddenly blazed to full intensity, and security personnel began moving with the coordinated efficiency of a unit that had been waiting for this moment. Not scrambling to respond to an unexpected intrusion, moving to execute a predetermined plan. "It's a trap," Hartwell said, stating the obvious. But Chen was already moving, leading the team toward an alternate exit route that would take them through the facility's administrative areas. "Not a trap," she corrected. "A test. They want to see what we're capable of." As they moved through corridors lined with offices and briefing rooms, Raven began to understand the full scope of what they were facing. The documents visible on desks and bulletin boards weren't technical specifications for weapons systems. They were operational plans for military campaigns, political analyses of target countries, and personnel assessments of government officials who could be influenced or eliminated. This wasn't just about selling weapons. This was about replacing governments. Team Alpha, you have 30 seconds to surrender before defensive measures are activated. Kine's voice echoed through the facility's public address system. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a facility that was designed specifically to contain people with your capabilities. Chen led them into a server room filled with computer equipment that hummed with the constant processing of massive amounts of data. Raven, can you interface with these systems? Probably, but do it. Download everything you can. Financial records, personnel files, operational plans, communication logs, everything. As Raven worked to access the facility's database, using techniques she'd learned during 12 years of intelligence gathering, Hartwell and the ISA operators established defensive positions to hold off the security teams that were converging on their location. Got it, Raven announced after several tense minutes. Financial networks, operational command structure, personnel assignments for all 17 facilities, and communication protocols that will let us track their entire organization. Outstanding, now we get out of here. But as they moved toward their planned extraction route, the facility's defensive systems activated. Blast doors sealed the corridors, emergency lighting created a disorienting strobe effect, and automated weapons systems began tracking their movement through the complex. Chen, this is starting to feel less like a test and more like an execution. Copy that, new plan, we go up instead of out. The facility's elevator system had been disabled, but the ISA operators had brought equipment for exactly this situation. Using explosive charges that created precisely shaped holes in the concrete floors, they began moving vertically through the building, bypassing the sealed corridors and defensive systems that had been designed to contain intruders moving horizontally. 3 floors up, they reached the facility's communication center, where banks of equipment maintained contact with facilities around the world. And there, waiting for them with a security detail of 12 heavily armed personnel, was Thomas Kine himself. Captain Miranda Vasquez, he said, using her real name for the first time in 12 years. You've caused us considerable inconvenience. That was the idea. Was it? Or was the idea to gather intelligence about our operations so that you could sell it to the highest bidder? The question caught her off guard, because it suggested that Kine had a completely different understanding of what was happening than she did. I'm here to shut down your organization and expose what you've been doing. Are you? Or are you here because General Patricia Hawthorne convinced you that we're the villains in this story? Chen stepped forward, her weapon trained on Kine's center mass. Stand down. You're under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and violation of international law. Kine smiled. Colonel Chen, you might want to ask yourself why General Hawthorne has been building a private intelligence network for the past 5 years. You might want to ask yourself who's really funding the Falcon organization. And you might want to ask yourself why she's been so interested in acquiring the technology that we've been developing. The implications of what he was suggesting hit Raven like a physical blow. You're lying. Am I? Check the financial records you just downloaded. Trace the funding sources for your little rescue operation. See where the